Today my guest is Chris Woodruff. Chris, how are you doing?
Good, Dave. How about you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
I want to congratulate you. You are the very first 3-time guest on Technology and Friends.
I'm honored. Thank
We're
you.
going to have a little party afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We'll have some cerveza.
That's Coca-Cola in Spanish, isn't it?
Maybe.
Let's talk about RIA services.
Yeah. So .NET RIA services.
What is RIA? That's RIA services.
Yeah. So RIA stands for Rich Internet Application.
Okay, and this is a new. I shouldn't say new, actually. It's still in beta. It's a framework from Microsoft.
Pre-beta.
Pre-beta, okay.
So it's still being kind of cooked and baked.
Okay, and what is this thing?
It's a project. Currently, it's a project at Microsoft, inside Microsoft, that is trying to bring N-tier development back to RIA application developers. So Silverlight, such as Silverlight.
Okay.
3 is what we're using with .NET RIA services currently.
Okay, is that hard to do? I'm not a Silverlight guy. Is it hard to do N-tier with Silverlight using the existing tools?
It's not hard. It's just that you just have to do a lot of coding by yourself. You have to do a lot of hand coding to go back to something on the server side. So let's back up. Let's back up and punt a little bit. So in my world, I think of multi-tier applications. I think of 4 tiers. I think of presentation. I think of business logic layer. I think of data access layer, and I think of a data repository,
Right.
aka SQL Server,
Sure. Pretty common pattern
Oracle.
for-
So pretty common thinking with most developers. Currently, most Silverlight applications puts the presentation, the business logic layer, and the data access layer into one area. So it's put into the same
Same tier? Same logical tier?
Yeah.
Physical tier?
So it's puts it into the same physical tier,
Okay.
aka the Silverlight application.
Okay.
So what we do is we take the Silverlight application and we
Okay.
pull out the code for the business logic layer and the data access layer
Okay.
onto the web server and wrap that in a ASP.NET project and have the Silverlight presentation layers, the clients, call back into this web application to get its data.
Okay, so the clients, so let me get this straight. So in Silverlight, you've got a lot of code that actually runs on the client inside the browser.
Yes.
So the client being me sitting at my desk in Michigan, even though the server's out in Redmond, Washington somewhere.
So yes,
so
Silverlight.
because it supports C#, it's tempting to put a lot of code in there because C# is a very powerful language and we can take advantage of all that stuff. But it's also, it's wrong to my way of thinking to have non-user interface code in the UI. That's not a good separation of concerns.
Exactly. So think back 15, 20 years ago when we had the first iteration of client server.
Mm-hmm.
We had tools like Power Builder and a lot of 4GL languages that would create big fat clients
Right.
that did everything, but the only thing that it didn't do was hold the data. And so these big fat clients would do the presentation, would do the business logic, would do the data access, and would just call back across the network back to a database.
And it would just serve up sets of data.
Yeah, and it would say, and a lot of times back then, people would just do select star from a table and then bring all that data into that client and then filter on it and page on it and do everything in there, and you're sending a lot of data across the wire.
Sure. It wasn't a big deal if you were on a LAN, which most people were in those days. The internet wasn't then.
But remember, that was all 10 megabits or less.
True.
Back then.
Yeah.
So if you're sending back 200, 300,000 records, you're going to clog up even a LAN pretty quick.
Yeah. So there's best practices for client server as well.
Exactly.
Just put a where clause in, for example, would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're trying to get away from that. So now we got Silverlight, and we're falling back into those old habits
Yes.
of just having 2 tiers,
Yes.
and there are problems with that. So we're allowing this. Is framework the right word for
Yeah, it is a framework. It's
services?
it's a,
and that helps to add a couple of extra tiers, and it facilitates that, right?
yeah. I mean, what we're really doing is allowing the web server to do a lot of the data kind of massaging.
Okay.
So, say you wanted to get all your employees that have been employees for more than 10 years. Well, you know what? You shouldn't send all employees up to the Silverlight app and then filter up at that level.
Right.
Really, what you do is the Silverlight apps should say, I just want to call this query with this parameter.
Sure. So only the middle tier will only get those.
And the middle
filters
tier
set.
will get that method call.
Mhm.
We'll get the parameter. We'll use that parameter in the where clause, meaning 10 years of employment or more.
Right.
And then it returns back, and then and it might even only return back the first page of data. So say GM has tens of thousands of employees, and say they have 20,000 employees that have been there 10 or more years. You don't want to send that many up to the client, but you're going to page. So maybe your pages are 50 pages each.
50 rows each. Right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, 50 rows each. It's been a long night. And so 50 rows each, and we're just going to send 50 back and forth. So every time we get a new data load, we get another 50 to bring up to the
So you can let
client.
your middle tier handle that paging. if you
Exactly.
want to.
And RIA services, that's a built-in feature.
Okay, that's.
You don't have to set that up.
So I was just going to ask you that I could just code that myself. I could write my queries and I could bring back pages of data. But why do I need RIA services to do that?
Well, I mean, it's built in, so all you really have to do is set up your front end to say, here's my load size, here's my page size. So you can actually, as an example I show in my demo, I have 20 records in a load, but my page size is only 10. So that means that I can do 2 pages on the client side before I have to call back to the server to get another load of data.
Fair enough.
And it is all built in. So I don't have to write code on the back end that says page or get next 10 or all the different ways that people write code to do paging.
Okay, a lot of that's
hand.
just done declaratively. You can specify page sizes
Yeah.
and number of rows to return and things like that. So that's what it provides you. It provides you that non-coding way of doing that.
Yeah, and it does some stuff for you that you don't have. It abstracts some of that stuff out for you.
Okay. What's the back end that we're looking at? Are we looking at just calling SQL Server directly and calling stored procedures, or are we using an ORM of some kind? Or
Well,
what is our RIA services?
.NET RIA services is flexible. So the business logic layer is part of the RIA services. So that handles like validation, that handles data conflicts. It handles a lot of the things that we as developers in the past would have to sometimes write by hand.
Sure.
The business logic layer can be anything from Entity Framework to Link to SQL to NHibernate to Fluent NHibernate to Poco. I mean, it's almost Poco is plain old CLR objects.
Okay.
So it's just if you hand built a bunch of your own.
Okay. So it's kind of modular.
Yeah.
It's expecting some data to come back, and how that data is retrieved is.
Yeah.
It doesn't really care.
So RIA Services has a thing called a domain service, and a domain service will interrogate your web project to know what object model you're using on the back end.
Okay.
And it will build classes to access that object model, such as the Entity Framework or NHibernate.
Okay.
And then from that, the .NET RIA Services, the framework itself will know how to interact between the presentation layer and the data access layer.
Okay, let's talk about that layer now. How does it interact? What's that look like? It's typically an internet application, right? If we're talking about Silverlight.
Yeah, so really it all starts back on the server. So you build your queries, you have your service, your domain service, and you can add query methods onto that.
Okay.
So when we build query method to say like, as an example, our employee. So maybe we have a get.
How about get one employee? I just want to get
Get employee by ID or
Yeah.
something. Everything has to end with a query. So it'll be like get employee query.
But that's
And
just a convention.
Yeah, it's a convention. And it takes in a parameter of employee ID.
Okay.
Well, when we build that project, because the Silverlight is kind of in that web project knows about the Silverlight project, it actually, through the RIA services, and it's kind of hard to explain without showing some examples and having a screen, but it will actually generate and bring that knowledge up to the Silverlight application, so that the Silverlight application, it has some code generated in it to know how to go back and call the queries back on the domain service.
Okay, all right. So the Silverlight, again, it's in my browser on my desktop, and the web server with all these RIA services running on, that's an IIS web server, has the business logic, has some methods that I'm going to call.
Yeah.
Am I calling them through like a web service, or how does the client call the server and get that data?
Yeah, it calls them very similar to like how you would call a restful
web service. Okay.
restful web service. So it goes across the wire, across port 80. You can have it go through SSL, some encrypted and secure ports, but by default it just goes across port 80, and we the back end sends all that data back up to the front end. I mean, the beauty of it is that originally that Silverlight, the ZAP file for that Silverlight, does exist on the web server.
Right, so you're doing two things with this web server. You're serving up these ZAP files for another client, and you're also using it as a business
service
rules
endpoint.
engine.
Yeah, I call it kind of a service endpoint for the Silverlight app to call back into the web app.
And the endpoint is this RESTful web service that you talked about.
Well, it's similar to it. It's not a pure RESTful. It's very similar to it. It uses WCF, so it does use some of the capabilities of WCF on the back end.
So it's an HTTP endpoint.
Yeah, it's an HTTP endpoint that has some feature. It has some features of REST. It's not a full RESTful web service, but it does implement some of the features of that.
Okay, and so this is this just for Silverlight?
No, I mean, you get the full features of it because like I said before, code gets generated from the server and gets brought into the Silverlight application. So the two ends, the presentation Silverlight client knows about the advanced features of the RIA services endpoint. And
but could I call those same endpoints from my WinForms app or my
you can.
ASP.NET?
So as an example, we could call it from WinForms. We can call it from traditional ASP.NET. We can call it from MVC, ASP.NET, MVC. We can call it from AJAX. You can call it from, very soon you'll be able to call it from WPF.
Okay.
And dynamic
Can
data.
I call it from Java? Can I call it from PHP?
I think you probably could if you build it to get to call that that endpoint correctly.
Okay.
I'm not
It's just an
100%
HTTP
sure.
endpoint,
I'm
so
not.
you should be able to
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah. I
Call
mean,
from a console.
I can't say 100%, but I'm almost positive that you should be able to call it from lots of different front ends.
Okay. So what about, you said earlier about validation. Describe that. How does that work inside
Yeah.
the services?
So the nice thing about validation is we can set validation up on the server side through data annotations, and those annotations we can say a field is read-only, required. We can give it a regular expression that when that property comes back on that class, it gets validated against a regular expression. So say like male, female, goes through to make sure that M or F or male or female, and so you can't put anything funky into it.
Sure.
We can put ranges. We can put other validations where we have two dates, maybe a start and end date, and we put a validation rule that says the end date always has to be after the begin date. So, and if those don't get validated, we will send back exceptions back to the Silverlight app, and the user will instantaneously know about that. Now, some of those simpler validation rules will be co-generated up into the Silverlight application, so that things like ranges. So, say a person's age. We say an age is between 0 and 150.
Okay.
That can be brought up into the presentation layer, so that data doesn't have to go pushed all the way back to the server, validated and pushed back to get the
Yes, the user has much faster refresh and better user experience.
Yes.
Okay, and that's handled automatically, and so you're generating it on the server, on the web server, and then sometimes you're also generating it on the client, and presumably you probably also have that same validation in your database as well. So
I usually don't, but
well, certainly for
sometimes.
Required fields,
Yeah.
maybe not for regular expressions so much, but anything that
Yeah.
actually has to do with referential integrity, like a required field, those would be
Yes.
important things to put in your database. Okay, is there anything else that you can tell us about RIA services that I haven't asked?
Not really. I mean, it's the next beta, the first beta for it will be coming out at PDC.
Which is in November, I think?
Yeah, mid-November.
Okay.
So the team will be releasing a beta, and they're predicting early to mid next year the first version, V1, will be out.
Is this going to ship with .NET 4.0, do you know?
No.
It's an out-of-band release.
It's an out-of-band release. They're still talking possibly bringing it fully into the Silverlight SDK, but that's still being discussed.
Okay. And you can find more about Chris Woodruff where?
Blog.cloudsocket.com, or you can go out to deepfriedbytes.com.
Deepfriedbytes.com, your podcast.
Yep.
Great podcast, I recommend it. Chris, thanks a lot. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Great presentation, great talk.
Thanks. Okay. All my friends love deep fried foods and technology.